Thank you, Tunku Abidin, for the opening remarks. The opening remarks has definitely set the tone for today's discussion. Without further ado, now I would like to invite the speakers for the first session to the stage to take their allocated seats for the panel discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, for the convenience of the audience, we will be addressing FAQs for this panel using Poll Everywhere. If you take a look at your table, there's a QR code that you can scan and submit the questions. You have to just put in your name and scan and just submit your questions, and you'll be addressed on the stage during the panel. Ira, the floor is yours.
Assalamualaikum. Good morning to everyone. Thank you so much for spending your Saturday morning with us at Ideas for our 8th Liberalism Conference. This is the 8th year we are organizing this, and I'm very happy to see actually many new faces to our event, many young people from universities. This is why we have the event on a Saturday. So I hope that next year you can get more of your friends to come. So it's just 5 minutes to 10. So for this first panel, which is on impartiality of the state, we will take questions, not using the microphone as we usually do, but via Poll Everywhere. You can scan the QR code which is printed on each of your tables and submit your questions. It's already activated now. So I will be taking questions from the beginning up to the end of this panel session. And you are welcome to submit them anytime. Before I introduce, just give a short introduction to our panelists, maybe I'll give a bit of a background on why we chose this topic particularly for this forum. So the topic is impartiality of the state. I think that it is important as Malaysians for us to understand what is the state with a capital S, right? How do we differentiate the role of the state from, say, the role of bureaucrats, or the role of, is there a difference? And is there a need for the state to be impartial? Or is there a position that the state needs to take in certain contexts? And I think if you read the news every day, you will see many instances in which the state takes a position on something or takes action against something, and this is some of the issues that we would like to unpack today. Yeah. So we have 3 esteemed speakers with us today. Ali Salman from the Islam and Liberty Network, Mr. Pak Irfan Abu Bakar from UIN and Sharif Hidayatullah in Jakarta, and Dr. Abdul Mukid Muhammad from University of Malaya. And we will have I'll take this panel for about 45 minutes before we go into a Q&A. Yeah? Okay, Ali, we will start with you today. And then I will open it to other speakers who would like to contribute. So maybe you can give us a 101 on what is the role of the state, and is there a difference in the way Western and Muslim majority nations think about the idea of the state?
Thank you so much, Ira. It's a pleasure to be part of this important Liberalism conference, which as former CEO of Ideas also have the pleasure of attending. Happy to be back here. Now, I think it is a very important question, but I will start with a very sort of generalized statement to begin with. And when we talk about the role of state, I like to invoke the definition of liberty and freedom itself. So Tunku Zain was mentioning about the understanding of and acceptance of liberalism in Malaysian context in Merdeka Declaration. But he was absolutely right that today when we hear this word, liberty or freedom, the perception, the association is somehow immoral, and which is obviously wrong because we use this word in the context of a political philosophy. Now, what is the relationship between the understanding of the freedom and the role of state? That is sort of my first task. A very important philosopher and historian of ideas in intellectual history, Isaiah Berlin, he wrote a very famous essay in 1958 which talked about two concepts of liberty, and in which he mentions these two terms, negative freedom and positive freedom. This is by negative freedom, he meant that freedom from coercion of others, of other human beings, and including the state authorities. And that essentially translates into protection of fundamental human rights that guarantees the equality of all human beings on all spheres of life, whether political, economic, religious, personal. It ensures that they are having a life which is protected from violence. So it's a negative conception of freedom. On the other hand, there is also a conception of positive freedom, and that is the notion that as citizens and as human beings, we have the rights to achieve or to be bestowed upon certain things, such as access to housing, access to clean water, access to free education, right? So, because obviously these rights, these concepts also heavily influence our understanding and expectations about the role of state. So if we are invoking, if we are emphasizing more on the positive freedom, then obviously the expected role of state in our lives would be much broader. We would want a state which is not only providing protection function, as as explained in the negative freedom concept, but also a positive freedom. And if you want the state to provide you all these services and goods, then obviously you are talking about a very big state, which means essentially a significant part of your income can also go to actually sustain that state. My idea of the role of state more closely aligns with the negative freedom. So state, the basic role of the state is to protect and ensure that our fundamental rights, which are with us by birth, are protected. This translates practically into rule of law. This translates practically into an independent judiciary, and also functions such as strong national defense, better police services, and things like that. So that as human beings, we have the freedom to pursue our paths, free from coercion and violence, whether this violence is imposed through individuals, groups of individuals, or organized form of state. Organized form of state is all problematic, and therefore I think there I see the role of state at least at a conceptual level more important. Obviously, then if the state is playing that role, we can expect maybe it can provide certain other services. But if the state is not providing that equal protection and protection of human fundamental rights, then I think the state is not fulfilling its function. Now, the part two of your question was whether these ideas, let's say comparing with Muslim societies and societies which are in modern contemporary the societies in the West, although this division is also problematic itself now, but for the sake of simplicity, are there any differences in how do we understand the role of state? Now, as you introduced, I'm part of this network called Islam and Liberty Network, which is a Malaysian organization, but operating in different countries. And we discuss this question time and again. Even this international conference which we held earlier, we had a very extensive debate on these conceptions of state. Now, I think from theoretical point of view, there are convergences, right? So people do talk about same treatment, the equal treatment of citizens without any discrimination. So that is there. But if you look at practical demonstration of these understanding in our constitutions, many of the countries, we had about 15 plus countries there. So we do see differences. We do see discriminations. We see that maybe state is preferring on some basis to a group of citizens and and having some discrimination. So so that problem is there. So we should admit that as a first instance. And therefore and I think it especially occurs in the area of maybe perhaps more a positive freedom but negative freedom, but state continues to have this problem. Now there have been various developments in last few years, which I would say positive one. And one particular development was Marrakesh Declaration, in which in 2016 there were a gathering organized and motivated by Sheikh Abdullah bin Wahia in Marrakesh. About 300 Islamic scholars gathered there, and they, after extensive deliberation, they issued a declaration which resonated the Charter of Medina, which Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, signed himself, between different religious groups, Muslims, Christians, Jews. And the fundamental part which we all recognize today and which was echoed in the declaration was that the idea of equal citizenship. The state was presented as like impartial or neutral to various communities as far as their religious identity was concerned. There have been various criticism on Marrakesh Declaration itself, whether it was a radical departure of modern understanding of our Islamic law and Sharia, but at least it was taken in a positive sense as a development towards that goal. So there are, I think, these sort of roadmaps which we see. But obviously, it's not fair to say that these problems only exist in Muslim societies when it comes to state. We have this phenomenal movement, Black Lives Matter, right? And the history, if you go back 50 years, we see that state was not that impartial, even in US, even in the West. So the state has evolved, the constitution, the rules have evolved, but we still see these tension even in Western societies, which you mentioned earlier. So the tension between, let's say, how the state looks at its citizen, and does it discriminate across citizens on base of their ethnic, religious, or other identities or not. The tensions are there in both, I would say, Western and Muslim majority societies, and there are also developments. So we all want to move towards a vision in which equality of citizenship without discrimination can be ensured. So these are some of my initial thoughts.
Thank you, Ali. I think you opened up many important points there, right? So you mentioned the state as a protector, and but over the years we see that the state does have preferences, or that the state does take very strong positions on many issues. Now I would like to move to Pak Irfan for your own thoughts on the matter. But also for you, I wanted to also ask on, I think when we talk about the role of the state and say, if we say the state should be impartial, there is a perception that means, we take something like, say, religion out of public life, right? But does that have to be the case? Are there examples, or is there a situation where we can have, say, religion to be a very central part of public life, but also not have the state, say, enforce certain views on religion to the population? So I would like to hear your thoughts on that, Pak Irfan. Yeah.
Thank you, Ira, panelists, Pak Ali and Pak Abdul Mukid. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for inviting me to this conference. I think it's my first trip to Malaysia. I'm looking forward since centuries, someone to invite me. Well, I will respond to the question of state impartiality. I think Western scholars, even Western scholars today, they tend to agree upon a theory that the idea of secularization, referring to the exclusion of religion in the public arena, is an already old school. Because of the globalization, the public arena or the public space already shared together by the three main components. Firstly, state, secondly, religion, and the third is the strongest one is, the capitals, the markets, the market. So the public arena we'll see today, it is always shared and to some extent contested by the state actors, religious actors, and the market. Okay, this is the first comment, and I will firstly define what we mean. In terms of in the context of Indonesia, what we mean by state-religion balance. Okay, it refers to the mutual recognition, and mutual respect between the state institution and actors and religious institution and actors, not between the state and the citizens. What we mean by religion is not an abstract theory, but it is always involve the actors and agency. In terms of Indonesia, the strong involvement of religious institution, especially the influential one, is the Nahdlatul Ulama, who claim to have like 40 or 50 millions of followers. And the second largest is the Muhammadiyah. So this is what we mean by the concrete religious institution that's very influential in Indonesian political arena. So that's the definition. For Indonesian context, the balance is relatively achieved today, although with efforts are not easy. It involves the experience of trial and error, tensions, and sometimes resistance in the course of the nation's history. But there is a clear goal towards stability. The future of the balanced relations will depend on the commitment of both state and religious agencies to the national consensus. And that was agreed upon at the initial formation of the state in 1945, upon which balanced relations were built. So after post-colonial, leading to the Indonesian independence since 1945, the founding fathers of Indonesia reflect two political forces. One is secular nationalists who were educated thanks to the Dutch colonial. They were sent to the Leiden University and so on, then so they exposed to the new idea of liberalism and nationalism, human rights, and so on. So this is the first political force. The second one is the so-called religious nationalists. Religious nationalists, and they debated on what the principles or the kind of the format that best suit to the new nation state that are going to be built. So they agreed upon the principles of the nation state, namely Pancasila, or the 5 basic principles, and the secondly is a democratic constitution. We have the name is Undang-Undang Dasar 1945, 1945, because it refers to the initial history of the constitutional. So, in the first article of Pancasila, it implies the state recognize the nature and existence of religious groups. So it reads, belief in the oneness of God. So this is quite tricky and ambiguous in the sense that Muslims or the Muslim leaders at that time, they would interpret this article as if it is, complies to the Islamic theology, the oneness principle or Tawheed. So they feel, so Indonesia is an Islamic country because of this first article. While our Christian brothers and others, religious groups, would also interpret the same article within their own theological context. So the oneness of God is like, the semiology of, it's a creative way to use the language. So all parties can accept it. So this is what we mean by kebijaksanaan. We Indonesia call it bijaksana, bijaksini. Kind of wisdom. So that's why it's hard to define whether Indonesian state is a secular state or religious state. One of Islamist political actor would say like this, Indonesia itu bukan negara agama, bukan pula negara sekuler, tetapi negara yang bukan-bukan. Because bukan agama, bukan sekuler. So this reflect kind of, difficulty to define, in a fixed definition of the state. So the article guarantees the role of religion in the public sphere at the first place, including in efforts to influence the direction of the state policy. So this is the tricky one. So it's not only they preach their religious teachings in their followers, but also they use the public sphere in order to influence the public, to state trajectory and direction, based on their own understanding of what should state to be managed. However, religion or religious institution has an obligation in carrying out its public rule to recognize and respect basic human rights, to understand that the state has an obligation to protect civil and political rights, including those belong to minority groups, maintain the unity of all Indonesian nations. Persatuan Indonesia is in the 3rd article of Pancasila. The 2nd article is kemanusiaan yang beradil dan beradab, referring to human rights principles actually. But of course, Indonesia cannot use the term because it is well recognized by the ulama as a thing that imported from the Western. They will reject it directly. That's why it's very important to be tricky in terms of linguistics. So in order for all groups to accept it. The 4th one, they have to follow democratic deliberative rules of the game. So democracy already mentioned in the Pancasila, but in terms of deliberative, not the quite liberal ones. But today, some Indonesians would complain that our democracy today is too liberal. While Western scholars like Jeremy Menchik would say Indonesian democracy is democracy without liberalism. So again, I recall you that our state is negara yang bukan-bukan. So the last one, the religious group also be oriented toward social justice for Indonesian people. So this is the principle, but in reality, of course, in the course of Indonesian history, there's always tension. You know, like you on the flight when I, on the plane, come to here from Jakarta. Of course, I always, dream to have a very nice flight without any, turbulence at all, right? But we always anticipate the turbulence. So this is the consequence if we take a balance. But today in our globalized life, we cannot expect that religion should be, put in the private room. It is not quite realistic and undesirable. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Irfan. Really, really great reflections, and thanks for sharing with us so much context on how the Indonesian state was formed at the point of independence and how that negotiation happened, right? Just for our non-Malay speaking audience, when we say bukan-bukan, it kind of means like nonsense, right? Kamu jangan bukan-bukan, so it's like, that's why we laughed when Pak Irfan used the term bukan-bukan, so just to share some context. Yes, in Malay, in Indonesian.
Irony.
Yeah. So that's why we laughed at that. So for Dr. Mukit, I think there are so many things that now I feel like I want you to respond, but I'm not going to put you on the spot too much and also save some of it for later. But our two speakers use the term state as protector, the state as needing to protect certain rights. So from you, Dr. Mukit, your own background on Malay studies, maybe you can share a bit on how Malays understand the concept of the state. And as we know that the term protector, Chandra Muzaffar wrote a book on it, right? And maybe you can share a bit on how Malays understand the state, and does that provide some explanation to the phenomena we are seeing today in Malaysia? Silakan, Dr. Mukit.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good morning. Thanks to the moderator, fellow panels, and the audience. My discussion today will be focusing on Malay perspective on the state, right? And their expectation to the state, and also their, what we call it, the state of intent. This will answer the ideal government that they have in their mind, right? As you mentioned, that liberalism is actually emphasize the individual freedom. So today, please allow me to continue my discussion in Bahasa. Is it okay? All right. And satu topik yang cukup menarik bila bercakap tentang, I will just mix my discussion both in Bahasa and English. It's an interesting topic, right? When we are talking about the state concept from the Malay perspective. Because as Ali Salman mentioned just now, the Malay have their own concept of state protector, which is underlined by Chandra Muzaffar, the protector. Dan kalau kita lihat ya, bahwasanya dalam bila melibatkan tentang peranan state ataupun negara di dalam melindungi kepentingan, dia tidak hanya dalam perspektif pemikiran Melayu, mereka melihat bahawasanya tugas state itu harus lebih memberi fokus yang lebih mendalam terhadap etnik Melayu itu sendiri. Dan kefahaman ini perlu untuk kita faham in order for us to underline certain measures so that the Malays also can accept the idea of liberalism itself. Alright. So bila kita tahu yang sebenarnya dalam konteks Malaysia tidak dapat tidak kita berbicara soal Muslim itu, Melayu itu akan bercakap tentang Muslim. The same goes with Indonesia. And ethno-religious, that is most important word that that we have to understand. Bila bercakap tentang ethno-religious, right? Di Malaysia ini kita ada beberapa kefahaman yang membuatkan identiti Melayu dan Islam itu begitu bercampur, begitu cair sifatnya. Dan kalau kita lihat kepada sejarah, kepada dasar-dasar yang dibuat sebelum ini sekalipun, kita akan faham bahawasanya dalam konteks ini ada Islamization of institution, ada konsep cultural Islamization, yang mana konsep cultural Islamization and also institutional Islamization ini telah pun membuatkan identiti Melayu dan Islam itu semakin sukar untuk dibezakan, ya. Dan membuatkan seperti yang Pak Irfan sebutkan tadi, untuk melihat bahawasanya tiada campur tangan ataupun melihat kepada konsep agama dalam konteks yang lebih kecil, dalam konteks yang lebih individu sifatnya, merupakan satu perkara yang almost impossible from the Malay perspective. Alright. So, bagaimana Malays melihat, bagaimana orang Melayu memahami state? Ya. Syekh Ali Salman menyebutkan tentang state should be a protector for all the citizens. Right? But from the Malay perspective, they have their own concept of protector, pelindung, yang mana membuatkan mereka melihat konsep protector itu perlu memfokuskan kepada lebih kepada etnik Melayu itu sendiri. Right? For example, kalau kita lihat dalam konsep pelindung ini, mereka mengharapkan supaya yang pertama, they don't have strong third force, makes them highly rely upon political parties to protect their political interests and also social interests. Okay? Dan sangat kebergantungan yang berlebihan kepada institusi kerajaan ini membuatkan mereka merasakan bahawasanya kerajaan perlu involve dalam banyak perkara, bukan setakat government, bukan setakat economic intervention, tapi juga social intervention. Right? So, dan benda ini memang jelas contradicts, bercanggah langsung dengan kefahaman idea-idea daripada liberal, yang mana kita meletakkan batas tertentu dalam penguasaan kerajaan terhadap individu dan juga masyarakat. Tetapi kalau kita melihat kepada kefahaman masyarakat, kepada orang Melayu itu sendiri, mereka melihat bahawasanya state intervention itu mestilah satu perkara yang sangat-sangat diperlukan. Dan dalam banyak isu dan aspek kalau kita lihat juga sebenarnya, kalau kita melihat dalam baru-baru ini pun dengan adanya kebangkitan yang kita panggil sebagai the green wave, gelombang hijau ini, sebenarnya satu gambaran, satu manifestasi tentang bagaimana kehendak sebenar Melayu dalam memahami, dalam mengharapkan satu bentuk kerajaan yang mampu untuk melindungi kepentingan mereka. Tapi nanti saya akan jelaskan secara historical context tentang apa yang kita sebutkan sebagai protector, the Malay protector itu. Cuma yang saya boleh rumuskan beberapa aspek. Yang pertama dari sudut state of intent from the Malay perspective. Yang pertama, Malays mengharapkan strong leadership. For example, mereka mengharapkan leadership, strong leadership macam Mahathir 1.0, bukan Mahathir 2.0. Tun Razak approach Mageran dan bukan macam Tunku, which is more tolerance. Jadi perkara-perkara ini penting sebab mereka dengan perkara-perkara ini, dengan ketegasan-ketegasan daripada state ini, mampu untuk dipanggil sebagai menjamin psychological comfort, keselesaan psikologi kepada orang Melayu dalam berdepan dengan pada mereka itu sebagai satu ancaman daripada beberapa pihak yang termasuklah kita katakan sebagai the non-Malays. Dan satu lagi dia, bila kita sebut tentang state of intent pada pandangan, pada perspektif orang Melayu ini ialah penggunaan state apparatus itu sangat jelas. Dan kalau kita lihat sehingga sekarang ini pun, apabila timbul isu-isu yang berkaitan dengan what we call it, kepentingan Melayu, kepentingan Islam dan sebagainya, mereka sangat, kita lihat, kalau kita baca komen-komen di media sosial, kita akan dapati bahawa mereka ada kecenderungan, they have tendency to become anti-democratic. They have a tendency to become restrictive. Sebab bila kata gunakan apa sahaja akta necessary, akta apa-apa saja akta yang mampu untuk menutup beberapa masalah-masalah yang dibangkitkan. Misal contoh ISA, sebagai contoh akta hasutan, akta penerbitan dan sebagainya. Jadi kalau kita lihat perkara ini, memang dengan adanya perkara-perkara seperti akta-akta yang dilihat bercanggah dengan hak asasi ini sebenarnya memberi satu kelegaan kepada orang Melayu, dan ini sebenarnya ialah cabaran untuk dalam kita meluaskan idea-idea liberal dalam masyarakat Melayu. Di samping kalau kita lihat idea-idea yang jelas bertentangan dengan konsep liberal macam state intervention itu memang sangat-sangat diperlukan. Jadi lepas ni mungkin saya akan teruskan dalam perbincangan lanjut tentang saya punya discussion dengan beberapa Malay konservatif, so that we can understand how they think about the concept of state and the state of intent that they try to achieve and they expect from the government. Okay, I think that's all from me.
Thank you, Dr. Mukid. Saya just nak Dr. tolong mungkin add satu je lagi point, right? Which is tadi Pak Irfan ada share tentang how the negotiation or the contestation that happens between different entities in the formation of the state, in thinking about the role of the state, what should be religion's place in society. Dalam politik Malaysia, kita selalu dengar this phrase, right? We always say this phrase in Malaysian politics, which is social contract, right? You know, so maybe the pro or the pro Malay nationalistic side will say there was a social contract that was decided by our founding fathers all those years ago, and this is something that cannot be debated or cannot be questioned, tak boleh dipersoalkan. And we have seen instances of state apparatus being used against those who question this concept. So maybe Dr. Mukid boleh share tentang perkara ini, kenapa kita ada certain konsep macam social contract ni yang mungkin tak sampai pun maksud dia yang sebenar ke atau sampai ke tidak, dan macam mana kita boleh arrive kat situation di mana sangat mencabar untuk kita ada satu diskusi tentang konsep ni.
Thank you, Ira. A good question. Bila saya buat, when I have conducted some interviews with the Malay conservative, there's a question that I ask them berkaitan dengan social contract. Sebenarnya memang kalau ikut sejarahnya memang tidak ada istilah social contract. Social contract ni ialah orang kata apa, social definition sahaja. Tapi apa yang dimaksudkan dengan social contract yang difahami oleh kebanyakan mereka ini sebenarnya apa yang dimaksudkan di dalam perlembagaan itu, iaitu the special position of the Malays. Tapi bila sebut special position of the Malays, mereka lupa tentang satu lagi aspek, satu lagi tambahan daripada special position of the Malays tu, iaitu kepentingan-kepentingan sah kaum-kaum lain. Ya. Jadi soalan ni saya ajukan kepada beberapa informan yang terdiri daripada NGO Pertubuhan Melayu Islam ini. Jadi dia katakan ini satu poin yang menarik lah daripada perspektif dia. Dia katakan, saya tanya, adakah kita tidak boleh ubah social contract ini kalau kita mendapat kita kata apa, kita ada social convention, persetujuan bersama. Jadi dia katakan kita tidak boleh ubah social contract sebab menurut mereka dia kata mustahil untuk kita ubah satu-satu perkara yang menjadi fundamental kepada pembentukan negara, tetapi yang menjadi isu sekarang ni ialah apabila pada saya adalah apabila mereka juga ada kecenderungan untuk menidakkan berlakunya diskriminasi terhadap bukan Melayu. Jadi bila ditanyakan perkara itu, ya, tentang kecenderungan untuk menjadi diskriminasi, jadi mereka menidakkan, ya, bahawasanya ada wujud diskriminasi dalam kerajaan apabila melibatkan kepentingan bukan Melayu. Jadi social contract itu satu topik yang apa orang kata, sangat topik yang luas. Cuma saya melihat kepada banyak perkara aspek kesamarataan, ya. Dan perkara-perkara ini sebenarnya dalam pemikiran Melayu agak kita sedia maklum, ya. Kalau tadi saudara Ali Salman menyebutkan tentang ada positif liberalism, negatif liberalism, kan. Tapi from the Malay perspective they are only one, ya. Hanya ada negatif liberalism. Jadi soal kesamarataan itu memang menjadi satu aspek yang cukup, orang kata apa, satu perkara yang agak alergik pada pandangan masyarakat Melayu, dan juga sukar untuk kita menembusi, untuk kita meletakkan satu naratif yang lebih pertengahan, ya. Bukan setakat kita katakan ingin melihat kepada sama rata itu, bahkan untuk pergi kepada naratif yang lebih sentris sekalipun mereka sukar untuk menerima pandangan-pandangan yang begitu. Saya sambung sikit lagi, sebagai contoh, ya, bila saya buat interview dengan beberapa NGO daripada yang lebih lenient konservatif kepada yang lebih kanan, ya. Jadi bila kita tanyakan soalan kepada mereka-mereka yang sama ada yang lebih lenient dengan yang lebih kanan ini, jawapan mereka sebenarnya hampir sama, ya. Dalam soal penggunaan nama Allah sebagai contoh, ya. Ini mereka sangat lagi, meskipun kata-kata yang kelompok ini seringkali ada satu kelompok NGO itu, meskipun dari sudut pandangan luar sering dilabel sebagai liberal dan sebagainya, tapi pada pandangan mereka sendiri secara peribadinya, mereka melihat bahawasanya soal penggunaan nama Allah itu masih lagi tidak dapat dikompromi. Mereka masih lagi mahukan, orang kata apa, eksklusiviti bila menggunakan nama Allah itu. Jadi banyak isu, ya, melibatkan kesamarataan, dan itu belum masuk lagi kita sentuh tentang interethnic relation ini. Jadi banyak perkara-perkara yang melibatkan social contract seperti yang saudari Aira sebutkan itu tadi, sebenarnya masih lagi jauh, terutamanya dalam perbincangan dan juga discourse about liberalism ini, hanya masih lagi concentrated in the urban area dan sukar untuk menembusi region-region, wilayah-wilayah yang di luar daripada circle kita inilah.
Okay, terima kasih Dr. Mukid. Saya akan kembali kepada beberapa poin sebentar lagi, tapi Ali, I would like to bring the discussion back to you. The term state apparatus has been used a few times, right, in our discussion, and I think is looking at Malaysia today, or looking at the world today, the liberal position, I think, is on, always on negative liberty, and how the state should come, or rather the intervention should come when there is harm being inflicted on others, But I think what we are seeing at the moment in many of our democracies is that the liberal position sometimes does not provide a satisfactory answer to how we can manage differences in society. So for example, I'll give some context. In Malaysia right now, we know that polarization is becoming very worrying. The political rhetoric has becoming more divisive. And we are seeing there are individuals or people both in civil society and in the general public who would usually hold a more liberal or less interventionist position in how government or the state should manage differences, are now advocating for the state needs to come in and control or restrict certain types of speech because it is considered harmful, right? So I want to get your thoughts about how liberalism, does it actually provide a satisfactory answer to this world that is getting more polarized and divided?
It's a very deep question. But I think, look, the basic tension here, which which we are experiencing now across the world, this region and other parts of the world, is this tension between liberty and democracy. And the problem is not much is understanding and implementing or translating liberal ideas into constitution. The problem is how are we navigating through a process of democracy. Because democracy is obviously built on the idea of a rule by majority, it brings in these tensions of inequalities, discriminations, the question of majority versus minority, there are various manifestations of that which we are seeing. For instance, what is happening in India, what is happening in also in Pakistan, this notion that a majority-based democratic rules can somehow address these issues of equality is inadequate, and I think that is because we have perhaps forgotten that democracy is a means to achieve a society with equal rights. Is not the end itself, right? Talk about, let's say, Pakistan's own history. I was recalling when Tunku Zain was referring to Merdeka Declaration and the notion of liberty and justice. But then he said that over the years, then that has gone back. So that has gone into some kind of that does not enjoy the kind of importance in politics today in contemporary Malaysia. Similarly, we had in Pakistan constitutional history, we had this idea in August 1947, just 10 years before Malaysia was Malaysia gained independence. Pakistan founder Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah also said something like this, the state is neutral, the state is impartial, and no matter which religious group you are free to practice your religion. Now, over decades, we also have forgotten that, and there were constitutional amendments which were brought on the pretext of majoritarian rule, which then ultimately proven harmful for individual liberties. And that also has led to, of course, now populist policies across the world. We are seeing this also in Europe with the far right politics demonstrating anti-immigrant movements. So it's not just happening, let's say, in the Asian or Muslim societies, but it's happening across the world. And that is a challenge which when we talk about liberalism or rights, I think we have a responsibility towards understanding and explaining this concept to the public at large, that what do we mean by this word, and how do we translate. Going back to the one reference which I provided in my initial comments was of Marrakesh Declaration. Now, Marrakesh Declaration, in the spirit of the Charter of Medina, highlighted three important parts, which I think are important for this discussion when you talk about liberty or liberalism. And those 3 points was equal treatment, inclusion, and pluralism. So as long as we can measure our legal systems, our political systems, constitutions, rules, and regulations versus these three important principles. Are we providing equal treatment to our citizens in terms of economic opportunities, educational opportunities, or we have introduced discriminations on certain bases? Are we inclusive in our decision making, or we are we are referring to certain groups as the core of decision making, and how much we are accepting the diversity in various groups? So that is the core idea of a liberal society, which is a society based on the notion of equality. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I did not find this word equality also in Merdeka. If I'm, I don't know, the word liberty and justice is there, but equality is not there. So that is, I think, the declaration. These are some of the notions which we need to tease out and to understand, what are the limitations which we have on our with our system today.
Thanks, Ali. Pak Irfan, I would like to get your thoughts on that as well. This question is actually also asked by a member of our audience. I'm just going to take it now because it's very related to my own question. So there is a question here on, what is your view, or the panel's view, when state impartiality actually gets in the way of political stability, right? So he gives an example. The state being impartial may cause influential political groups to be sidelined, causing them to attempt to gain power, which can destabilize the political climate. So that's the question. It's quite long, but I think I just want to summarize that by asking you, Pak Irfan, are there situations where the state needs to come in and say, no, the ideas you are propagating is not in line with the principles in which this nation is founded, and your association or your group needs to be disbanded, right? So maybe your comment on that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. If we imagine how this state run, right? We have ideals, but we have a practical experience. So in reality, democracy, human rights, equality, social justice, and so on, it's always, be practical if supported by the majority. So it's very important for those who supporting these democratic and liberal ideas to get engaged within the political arena and influence every parties. I'm talking about the role of civil society, right? Free thinkers like me in the campus, in the campus has that rule, right? Because we cannot leave it to the political actors. Because political actors and political parties, they always think about their own political interests. So there still need, a more independent, autonomous groups that remind every parties that we have principles to adhere to. We have already agreed upon and national consensus and so on. That's why production and reproduction of the ideals is very important to be, guaranteed, applied in the educational system, in the political discourse and religious discourse. And when each political actors enter into the political arena, be it individual or institution, they always think how to get the capital for their own advantage, right? Be it economic, political, how to get political access easily, economic access easily, and so on. So we need to advocate that every party who want to get this capital have to obey the rules, have to stand for the ideals. So even now, in Indonesia, religious institutions like Nahdlatul Ulama and the Muhammadiyah, they have to follow the tendency, the direction to more democratic behavior. It is not because they will enter paradise, when they practicing the democratic ideas. They have their own internal discussions, questioning whether it is, be more Islamic to be more democratic. They still have it, kind of tension within themselves to questions, because can we say that to be more democratic is to be better Muslim, is to be more democratic. To be better Muslim is to be liberal, to be secular. There is an internal, dynamic within themselves. So it's very important to have that discourse, in the organization, in the institution. So we need to see the political interest. So when, in Indonesian experience in recent decade, when the transnational Puritanist ideology came to influence into the Indonesian political arena, then the Muhammadiyah and the Nahdlatul Ulama will protect their own interests, and try to minimize their influence. And right now, since the financial support of the Saudi Arabia, less and less, because Muhammad bin Salman start to liberalize, then they will start to, discuss with how Indonesia can, Muslims majority can have a kind of, balance. Perhaps they will be like Indonesia in the future, except Makkah and Medina. I don't want to be liberalized. I want Makkah and Medina still be conservative. Well, so then they now think how to be more adaptive to the national consensus. Even the Salafi pesantren, right, today, because of the financial situation, they have to come to the Minister of Religious Affairs to see whether they can have like a financial support. And the state will say, well, okay, we will work with you, we will support you, but you have to have this curriculum in your schools. Then so there's a negotiation. We can expect the religious institution as a once and for all is fixed. It is something secular in their own, nature actually. We see religious actors and institutions as religious per se. But in political experience, they are secular, actually. Although they don't want to recognize it, because, religious identity is also part of the game. So understanding this kind of the nature need, for the political actors, be it secular or religious, they have to understand it, to be more creative, more balanced, and more wise. When, enter into the difficult situation, whether the state had to interfere into the political religious arena. Like in Indonesia today, we have hate speech act, in which myself, I was the one who write for the act, because we need it. Otherwise, they will use, the hate speech in order to discriminate minority groups. So what we need to have like this hate speech in order for the minority group to have enough freedom for them to practice. So whoever from the majority groups incite the hatred to this communal identity, then the state should interfere. There's no other way unless, we will experience a chaotic situation. Thank you.
Terima kasih, Pak Irfan. You make a really interesting point there, and it, I think, touches upon the larger question of democracy and whether democracy can actually mediate non-liberal or more extreme views. Because I think you made the distinction between when religious groups outside of politics and when they enter into political arena. So I want to get